Thanks for tuning in to SOCMA's podcast, where I sit down for a fireside chat on current trends affecting the specialty chemical sector. I'm Jennifer Abril, President and CEO of SOCMA. In this episode, I talk with Andy Doyle, President and CEO of the American Coatings Association. Andy tells me about the cautiously optimistic outlook for the coating sector in 2024, his expectations for the coating show coming up in just a few weeks, and hot topics suppliers like SOCMA members should be watching for affecting paint and coatings producers. So let's dive into it.
Thanks for joining again to the SOCMA podcast. I'm Jennifer Abril. I'm President and CEO of SOCMA, and today joining me is a good friend and association colleague, Andy Doyle, who is the President and CEO of the American Coatings Association. Andy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jennifer. Happy to be here.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. I think I mentioned to you, Andy, that in a recent poll, we asked our sector, who did they want to hear from? What was the next sector they'd like to hear from on the podcast? And far and away, the coatings and paints sector was number one. So we're super excited to have you. Can't wait to learn more about what's going on in your world.
Well, thank you very much. That's very flattering of you and your memberships to put me up at such a high level, but that's probably your first mistake that you.
Well, we're looking forward to hearing more. So you've been at the helm of ACA for a very long time. Give us just a little bit of a sense of your history, the history of ACA, who its members are. Tell us a little bit about your organization for anybody who's not familiar with it.
Yeah, so yes, I've been here for a while, and I've been blessed to be part of this industry and part of this organization for almost 45 years now. So it's amazing, and time flies when you're challenged and you're having fun, and I'm both challenged and having fun. So, and the industry, it's a great industry. The paint and coatings industry contributes to about 70 to 75% of the GDP of the country. So it's really quite amazing. So if you think about all of the things that the U.S. economy does and the products that it makes, coatings are a big part of that and are on virtually everything that we see and touch on a daily basis, from airplanes to our homes, to furniture, to kitchen appliances, to computers, to water systems, to bridges, to space technology, to medical devices. It's really quite a phenomenal industry and quite a high-tech industry as well. So most people don't think of the paint industry in that way. They think of what you go to a store and buy for your home, which we all do, and we appreciate that. But there's so much more to the coatings industry than just architectural paint, which by itself is a very important part of our industry, for sure.
Yeah, and that would explain, I imagine, the interest of the specialty chemical sector of understanding the breadth of what's going on in the sector that you represent.
Yes.
So in terms of your sector, the paint and the coating sector, what's the outlook for this year? How are people feeling? I know you've got a big show coming up. Some of the SOCMA members attend your show, the American Coating Show. That's going to be at the end of April, I believe, in Indianapolis. What are you starting to hear going into that? How's the outlook for this calendar year? What are you hoping to learn more about when you get on the show floor?
Well, I think the outlook for 2024 is positive for the industry across the board. Cautiously optimistic, I would say. One of the things that I think is somewhat unique about the coatings industry is that the way that we can measure growth in the coatings industry is virtually identical to what is going on in GDP growth for the country. It's almost a one-to-one relationship. So if GDP is scheduled to grow at 2%, you can pretty much count on the overall coatings industry to grow at about the same level going into that particular year. So, what's happened over the last 4 years is that, like a lot of other industries, in 2020, we saw a dip in production and volume for our industry. But what was unique about 2020 during the height of COVID is we saw major parts of our industry take a major dip or a decline, like the automotive industry, the automotive OEM industry. But we had reasonably good growth in the DIY segment of the architectural industry. So we had some parts of our industry showing strong growth, some parts of our industry showing strong decline in 2020 itself. And then 2021, we saw a tremendous rebound because of the country getting back to normal and a lot of products being produced in 2021. So we saw a big rebound. Then in 2022 and 2023, we experienced what a lot of industries experienced, which were a big increase in our raw material costs and quite a bit of shortage in the materials that we use to produce our products. So we had a supply chain problem as well as an increase in raw material costs, which impacted the industry in 2022 and 2023. I think what we're seeing now is a hope of returning to normal in 2024, which is a decline in some of the raw material cost challenges we're having. We're seeing supply chain disruptions ease, which has been good for the industry. And so 2024 is shaping up to be more of a typical coatings growth year with volume around 3%, 2.5% to 3% growth. Value may not be as much as that in terms of the value of the industry, but overall, I think generally pretty good and fairly optimistic, which is the feeling I think going into this year and going into our show.
And that tracks with what we saw at our SOCMA show in February. The word of the week at the show was cautious optimism. That was what we were coming out with too. So we're tracking there. So speaking of supply chain and thinking about how you're thinking about trends and getting back to some semblance of normalcy, does that track with what you're seeing also overseas? And I know you just came back from a meeting with some counterparts, you told me, in China. So tell me a little bit about what you're hearing from your global counterparts and what's life like on the ground in China these days. Not all of us have been back to China since COVID hit.
Yes. I think in general, we did just have a meeting in China of a group called our World Coatings Council. And this is a group of 17 associations from around the globe. Virtually every part of the world is represented. We've been organizing this council since 1992, so it's now 32 years old.
Yeah.
And the mission of the council is to coordinate the global positions of the industry. And we work on issues before the United Nations. We present positions and papers. And in fact, the World Coatings Council, I'm happy to say, is a recognized non-governmental organization. And that provides us the opportunity to participate in committees and actually have more of an official role in some of the deliberations at the UN on issues of concern to our industry. So we have an annual meeting every year, and we happen to be hosted this year by our counterparts in China, the China National Coatings Industry Association. So that was a great opportunity to return to China. I hadn't been there since 2018 or 2019. I can't recall. So it was before the pandemic, that's for sure. And But we had that opportunity. We met in Shanghai and brought together all of our colleagues to discuss these issues. So, I mean, globally, I think it's fairly consistent with what I spoke to just a few minutes ago in terms of the outlook for the industry.
Okay.
With higher growth rates predicted in Asia, as you can expect, the coatings industry, in terms of the volume produced of coatings, probably about 50% of the volume of global coatings are produced in Asia. So that is a very, very important part of the world for our industry. Their growth rates in the past have been much higher than what you see in North America and in Europe. And I think that will continue in 2024. Maybe not quite as much of a difference between the growth rate in Asia, certainly in China and in North America, for example, but there is a difference in higher growth rates. I think Europe, in terms of its production and its volume growth and value growth, will lag behind Asia, certainly, and also lag a little bit behind North America, because the economy is probably about 6 months behind the US in terms of its recovery throughout Europe. Now, of course, Europe's a big place and made up of many, many different countries. So that may not be universally true across Europe. You could see higher growth in certain parts and lower growth in other parts. But generally, it's about the same, and we're looking to that. China was great. Shanghai was certainly busy and exciting, as it always is. From an outsider looking in, it's sometimes hard to see what the underlying problems might be. So I don't think that I could give you a true sense of the Chinese economy, having spent only 72 hours or so on site in Shanghai. But I'm pleased to have a chance to go back. It's a fascinating part of the world, fascinating city.
Quick trip, 72
Yes,
hours.
a very quick trip.
Quite a traverse to get there for the meeting.
Right.
So we're seeing in our sector increased interest in manufacturing locally, regionally.
Yeah.
So does that track with what you're seeing? And tell us what's happening a little bit more on sort of demand for U.S. production, North American production, and also what policy issues are you focused on right now when it comes to a North America or a U.S. focus?
Yeah. So the coatings industry is a very domestic industry, and you can say that throughout the world. It's the nature of the product. There is export, certainly between the U.S. and Canada, and U.S. and Mexico, because of the close proximity of the countries. And you can see that throughout Europe, where you have manufacturing in one place and export in the other place. There's not a whole lot of export, let's say, between large distances because of the cost of exporting the product largely, and the advantages of being able to make it locally. So for us as a U.S.-based coatings industry, we're heavily weighted to U.S. manufacturing for virtually all of our products. There's exceptions to that. There are specialty products that you make and you export because of the nature of the product, but it's heavily focused here. There is maybe some difference in terms of the import of raw materials. That can happen in certain sectors for sure, but it's mostly a domestic based industry from that standpoint. So in terms of and I think that will continue, and in terms of some of the policy issues that we're looking at. One of the major policy issues that is facing the U.S. coatings industry is this whole idea of extended producer responsibility and how that impacts the coatings industry and what's going to be required of the coatings industry in terms of managing its products from from production to end of life for the industry. So that's certainly a challenge.
Can you talk a little bit more about sort of the concept or the definition of extended producer responsibility for those that might not be as familiar with it, and how does that link in the supplier base, perhaps?
Sure. So really the way that it's being approached at state level, and I think right now there are 4 states that have what we call packaging EPR laws, packaging extended producer responsibility laws. And then there are 2 additional states that are considering extended producer responsibility laws to deal with the product itself. And so what these laws are in essence saying is that if you manufacture and sell a product in that state, or you manufacture a product with packaging and sell it in that state, then you're going to have to, you must be responsible, not just for selling it to the end user or the consumer, but you are going to need to be responsible for either the product or the packaging or both in terms of knowing where it is going at the end of its life.
Yeah, okay.
So you will need to be responsible for when a consumer buys it. You'll be responsible for helping that consumer manage the disposal or recycling or otherwise management of that product or that package at the end of its life. And so you as an industry will have to create a program to do that, or you will need to abide by a program that we create as the state and that we require you to pay for, most likely through some sort of tax on your product or your package. So that's in essence what it's intended to do, or how it's operated.
Yeah, and from the point of view of suppliers or those that produce ingredients that go into the ultimate consumer product or the industrial product, how would SOCMA members get brought into this alignment? So take a final producer, one of your members, and what are some of the asks that your members might be having of SOCMA members with relation to extended producer responsibility?
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of an unknown at this point in time.
Okay.
To be honest with you, because we're not sure the extent to which these laws will go, and the requirements that will be placed on our producers, on our manufacturers. It's a little bit more defined on the packaging side. So, for example, for packaging suppliers to our industry or to SOCMA members or anybody else, there will be pressure to provide packaging that's comprised of recycled content, or packaging that can be 100% recycled at some point in time. Because a lot of the packaging that we use right now, not everything is recyclable, or not everything is 100% recyclable.
Yeah.
So eventually there'll be pressure on that. That possibly could extend to the materials that go into the product itself. Although we're not seeing right now any particular mandates that say, okay, if you make a paint product, it has to be comprised of materials that are from a certain sustainable source. So we're not seeing that yet. Now that could be eventually the case, but at this point in time, no. I think the from a supplier standpoint to our industry, I think the main, I think, concern, or what folks should probably best understand, is what's on the minds of coatings companies. What are the challenges that they're facing? What are the regulations that they're dealing with, whether it's extended producer responsibility or trying to identify PFAS in their products and report that and remove it, or dealing with things like microplastics. Microplastics is a huge issue for our industry because our products are made of polymers, and the question is, are these polymers considered plastics themselves? And if considered plastics, does that cause the coatings industry to be a large contributor to this microplastics waste stream? And so knowing the challenges that the end user, the end manufacturer is having might help suppliers think through solutions that they can bring to the table for their customers, anticipating these possible challenges.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you put it in terms of providing solutions and be thinking about what else is coming up for our customers. Talk a little bit, you touched a bit on sustainability, and talk a little bit about sustainability at ACA. How do you approach it? How do your members approach it? What does sustainability look like for you?
Yeah, well, sustainability as a subject has been very important for the industry for a number of years. And it's important and a large part of what our individual companies do. They all have their own sustainability approach and sustainability program within their own company. But in addition to that, the association has been, I guess, the best way to do it, launching a number of initiatives over the years. Our largest sustainability effort is a stewardship program that we call Pink Care.
Pink Care, yeah.
Pink Care, and you've heard of this, and I think you're well aware of it, is the industry's program to manage the collection, transportation, and recycling of leftover architectural coatings.
Yep.
And that's been ongoing since 2010. And through that program, we have collected and recycled more than 80 million gallons of architectural coatings. Wow. And it is something that we're extremely proud of. We operate programs in 11 states across the country, and the program is growing. We're hoping to add 1 or 2 states every year for the next several years. So that's an important initiative for the association, for the industry. We also have put together over the course of the years a series of product category rules, which are guidelines that allow our members to evaluate their products, to make it easier for them to produce environmental product declarations for those individual products. And the reason that's important is because those environmental product declarations usually speak to characteristics of the product themselves, which would then help our industry's customers better understand the sustainable nature of the product itself and help them in their communication and marketing. So that communication about what we're doing, how the product is performing, why it's sustainable, that information is vitally important to our customers. So we provide that information. We also produce every couple of years a sustainability report, which goes through the achievements of our industry. Most industries do now, and I think it's a great communication tool. So that's been important for us. So those are some of the things we're always looking for new opportunities and we're open for new ideas. And in fact, one of the key themes for our trade show coming up in late April, early May is sustainability. And there'll be a number of different exhibitors featuring products that are sustainable or new techniques and new solutions that feature sustainability.
Well, hugely successful program through Paint Care. I mean, we've talked about that in the past. The amount of growth that you've had and how much that you've been able to contribute to being able to recycle and be good stewards is really incredible. So kudos to you. So we talked about some issues, interesting issues, extended producer responsibility, sustainability, even PFAS, supply chain concerns, the health of the sector. Anything else in terms of emerging issues that you would think from a just monitoring key pressure points or developing topics that our customers will be managing through? Anything else come to mind? Anything U.S. related, EPA, OSHA, trade, or otherwise?
Sure. Well, I think like SOCMA or any industry in the chemical products sector, there is a litany of issues, that run, pages and pages of what we have to concern ourselves with. So, but I'll just mention a few others which occupy a lot of time and do have relevance to how our companies relate to their suppliers and supply chain. Of course, VOC limitations.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
And hazardous air pollutants. That's been a major issue for our industry for, my goodness, for 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that directly impacts formulation strategies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's always a back and forth discussion between our manufacturers and their suppliers on how they can achieve the right formulation to satisfy ever evolving and ever changing VOC requirements. So that's something that's always ongoing.
Perennial challenge. Yep.
Yeah, biocides is a big issue for the industry. We're fighting every day in the U.S. and more so in Canada and in Europe to maintain biocides, certain biocides for use in the industry. I mean, there's an onslaught of regulations and restrictions that could impact how biocides are used and what quantities and what biocides are used. And those things are extremely important to the coatings industry in terms of the coatings performance and in-can preservation. Those are very important features for the industry themselves. So that's another aspect of, or another issue that we have to be on top of all the time. But there are so many: transportation of hazardous materials, safety and health issues in the plant, hazard communication, TSCA implementation. All of these occupy time all the time, and depending on your interests, they can be very exciting topics, or they can be maybe not the most exciting topics. So, yeah, absolutely. But I should just add, as an aside, you mentioned our trade show at the beginning of our discussion, and we're very excited about the show. I was happy to hear that the SOCMA show went very well, and it's great success.
Yeah.
To me, that bodes well for our industry's biennial event. And so right now it's looking like we're going to exceed and break records that we set in 2018 for exhibitors, for attendees for the floor space that we have. We have a big technology conference that I think this year has 96 papers that will present over 2.5 days. And we expect about 1,000 attendees at the technology conference itself. So we're excited about that. And we're very pleased and happy with the support that we've been given by the chemical producers and the raw material industry. It's been tremendous. I can't tell you how fantastic it's been that the chemical companies have supported this show. It's really been wonderful. So I would say to all the SOCMA members who are also exhibitors at the ACA show, the American Coatings Show, thank you very much for your support. It's terrific, and we're looking forward to seeing you.
Yeah, well, that's a fabulous way for us to cap off for today. We wish you the best of luck. We know that many of our members will be there. SOCMA staff will also be joining you on site. So we will look forward to celebrating your good success and best wishes for the remainder of a very optimistic 2024. Andy, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate everything.
Very much. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. I hope to see you back here for our next one. In the meantime, check out SOCMA.org or our LinkedIn feed for links to other podcasts and SOCMA programs.